Hi everyone, this is Aaron for Zollotech, and we're going to be comparing the Atrix 4G to the Droid X2. Now the interesting thing about both of these is they both have the NVIDIA Tegra 2 processor in them. They use a little bit different interfaces as far as Moto Blur is concerned. We have a newer interface on the Droid X2, but they both run Android 2.2 Froyo. We'll go into the specs later, but let's first talk about design. Obviously you can see that the Atrix is smaller than the X2. The Atrix has a 4-inch screen, while the X2 has a 4.3-inch screen. However, they both have 540 by 960 displays, so you get the same pixel density between both capacitive touchscreens and devices. Now, as you might also see, you can see we have a forward-facing camera on the Atrix, where the Droid X2 does not have that. That's not really too big of a deal, as I find a lot of people don't use it. Now, that may not be true for you, but there are quite a few people that I know that they like to have the feature, but they never really end up using it. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the front design. We have an indicator, as you can see, is blinking here. We also have one here. And we have very different designs. We have more of a square design with the Droid X2, with tactile buttons at the bottom. We have a menu, home, back, and search button, and there's your microphone. On the Atrix we have the same buttons, but they're capacitive buttons. We have, again, you've got your settings, home, back, search. On the side, let's go ahead and look, and also we have our speaker here, obviously. On the side, again, we have our micro USB and HDMI outs. They're basically the same, and not a whole lot of difference there. Now on the back, we have very big differences as far as what we get. On the Atrix, we have a 5 megapixel dual LED flash camera that takes 720p video. On the Droid X2 we have an 8 megapixel camera, as you can see, maybe it says right there, that also has dual LED flash and records in 720p. But that's really about where the similarities, they both have cameras, dual LED flash, but the similarities kind of end there. As you can see, we have speakers down at the bottom. We have a noise canceling microphone here, where the noise canceling microphone is up here on the Atrix. On the back of the Atrix, you have this is your sleep-wake button / on-off button and unlock button, as well as a fingerprint scanner. So if you want to unlock your phone, you can simply go like this and scan your finger over. I do find it's good placement. When you go ahead and scan your finger, it will unlock if you want to set it up that way. The main thing is, this is plastic, this is metal. There is a very different feel and build quality between the two phones. The Atrix feels nice and light because of the plastic back, where the Droid X feels heavier, but the Droid X feels more substantial, more solid, more rigid. On the back we can slide this off here, and you can see this is metal, this is aluminum, although there's some paint overspray there, but it does have a rubberized kind of texture to it. And as you can see, we have our battery. Let's go ahead and pop the back of the Atrix off, and you'll see what I mean. There we go. You can see we have a SIM card. This is actually a SIM card adapter from my iPhone, the micro SIM to the full-size SIM. And this is a plastic back. Now that's good in a way that you can replace it easily, but it does easily scratch compared to metal. Now underneath the back, as you can see, obviously we have a SIM card here. We have our micro SD card slot. There is not one in here, but we've got 16 gigs of onboard RAM, while this one has an 8 gigabyte SD card, or micro SD card. The batteries are different also. The battery in the Atrix is much larger than the battery, not physically necessarily, but much larger capacity-wise. You can see this says BH6X, this says BH5X. Let me go ahead and pull these out here for you. And the milliamp hour is where we get the difference. The one in the Atrix is an 1880 milliamp hour battery. Now that's good because you have a lot of different functionality that we'll talk about later with the Atrix. On the Droid X2, if we pop this out here, it's a thinner battery, and it's a 1500 milliamp hour battery. And that makes for a difference as far as battery length. Obviously, you've got more capacity in the Atrix. But the Atrix does some more things through the HDMI and that sort of thing, as you may already know. Let's go ahead and pop these back on here. Now the X2 and the Atrix also have volume rocker buttons on the side, metal on the Droid X2, plastic on the Droid or not Droid, the Atrix 4G. Again, with that 4G name, we have 4G inside the Atrix, where the X2 does not. Now that we've talked about the design and what each phone kind of feels like, let's talk about the specs. As I mentioned before, both phones have an NVIDIA Tegra 2 processor with dual 1 GHz cores in them. We also have the cameras, like I mentioned before, 5 megapixel with dual LED flash, 720p video. We also have a VGA or 0.3 megapixel forward-facing camera on the Atrix. On the Droid X, we have an 8 megapixel dual LED flash, 720p video recording, and no forward-facing camera. Both of these phones have a decent amount of RAM, but the Droid X2 has 512 megs of RAM, while the Atrix has 1 gigabyte of RAM. They also both have internal storage, or this one comes with a micro SD card of 8 gigabytes, while the Atrix has 16 gigabytes of storage. Let's go ahead and turn them on. Again, here's the button here. Here's the button on the top of the Droid X. They're both turning on. Now, this isn't really a comparison as far as speed goes, but you can see they're both booting. They both say dual core technology with the Motorola symbol. The Droid X, while it does have the larger screen and feels more solid, I tend to like the 4-inch screen myself, but that's really preference, or the preference of the user. They both feel equally good. They're both very responsive. They're pretty much the same screen as far as that goes. Wait for these to boot. Now, the Atrix has 4G, and that's Motorola's, or AT&T's rather, 4G. And that's a little bit different than, well, some people will argue that it's not true 4G, or HSUPA, which is capable of 14.4 megabits per second for download. Now, as you can see maybe here, let me zoom in a little bit so maybe you can see that. At the top you'll get an H+, which means 4G. We have AT&T 4G in my area. I don't have Verizon 4G, but this isn't a 4G phone, so that's not really a big deal here. Now, both displays look nice. As you can see here, they're the same resolution, but you have a slightly larger screen on the Droid X2, as I mentioned before, and you have different wallpapers. These are the default wallpapers. Let's go ahead and unlock the screens. Now, I've fully customized the Atrix since I have my own SIM card in it and I can use it, but the docks and things look a little bit different on the X2 because it has a more recent version of the Moto Blur interface that Motorola provides. They both run Froyo, and I can show you that here. We'll go into the settings. They both feel very responsive. They're about the same, but again, we have an extra or double the RAM on the Atrix. Let's go ahead and go to About the Phone. You can see they're both very fast. Android 2.2.2 on both devices. And this one's a little washed out because it's got the white background there. Now, like I said, both are very fast, very responsive, no problem there. You do have a customizable dock on the bottom of the Droid X2 that you can change these icons around, and that probably will be coming to the Atrix along with Gingerbread for both devices. The Droid X already has Gingerbread out, while the X2 doesn't at the time of this recording. Now, like I said, both of these phones are about equal as far as speed goes. Battery life, surprisingly, is about a day for both of them. And I don't know if that's the architecture of the Atrix and its ability to do docking and things like that. But let's first talk about the interfaces. They're both about the same, like I said. You can see this one. There we go. It seems to pick up speed as it stays active for a minute, and let's go ahead and hit home. Moto Blur is pretty nice. These social apps use a lot of, not only really bandwidth, but a lot of battery. And I like to have all that information up front. Here's my Twitter username, ANZolo. If you haven't followed me on Twitter, go ahead and do that if you wouldn't mind. Now, let's go ahead and talk about the capabilities, because both are basically the same interface. Let's go into the apps, You can see they both scroll well. There's not really any hiccups. This just is going to look a little bit different since it has the nicer or newer Moto Blur interface on it. And that'll be updated, I hope, on the Atrix soon. Now, I do like the tactile buttons on the bottom. You may or may not, it may not matter to you. But the capabilities of each phone are pretty nice. They both have mirroring via the HDMI port, so that means you can plug them into your television or any HDMI enabled monitor, and you can put the exact same screen you see here up on your screen on your TV. And that means if you're running Netflix through here, you could run it up onto your television. You might get a better result with something like a Google TV, an Apple TV, Roku box. Any of those are probably going to give you a better resolution and not be as choppy in my tests than the phones are, but they both will do that. Now, the Atrix, as you may know, has the ability to dock and kind of turn into a mini computer, or kind of one of those Chrome tab or Chrome OS devices. So basically you've got a laptop dock and you've got a dock that's called the desktop dock that you can plug in a monitor, keyboard, and mouse, and this can be your computer, and it basically runs as a web browser and can have that sort of capability with Flash browser and everything, and it runs really nice. It's not really something you want to use for, say, like video editing. It's kind of too slow for that, but it will really work just fine as far as browsing the web, checking Facebook, maybe looking at Picasso for your photos, that sort of thing. Works great for that, and I think that's something Motorola should think about maybe for all of their phones, as they did with, I guess what's supposed to do the same thing is maybe do the same thing as the Droid Bionic when it comes to Verizon a little bit later. I'm not sure why it got delayed so much, but they've changed some specs, that sort of thing. But really, they're not that different between one another, other than the physical form and what carrier they're on. Speed-wise, I really don't see too much of a difference. But the last thing we're going to do is we're going to do a spec test. So let me make sure I have that on both of these here, so we can do a quadrant standard score here. I don't have quadrant on the Atrix. Let me go ahead and grab that, and then we'll do a test for the final result. I have quadrant installed on both phones. Let's go ahead and open it. There we go. And yeah, that's okay. And let's go ahead and run a full benchmark and see what we get. Now, with more RAM, I would expect the Atrix to do a little bit better, but that's not always the case. Processors vary a little bit, and the 3D graphics, while it's supposed to be the same, could vary a little bit. I would expect, though, the Atrix to do a little bit better. That was running at 14 frames per second, while this is running at 29. Again, 14, 15 frames per second. 29 on here, identical. I really wouldn't expect to see too much of a difference that way. And like I mentioned before, battery life on these, they'll get you through a day. But they really don't seem to be too big of a difference between the two. It really depends on Moto Blur and how many apps you're running. Again, we're getting 40 frames here. They're about the same. Sure, we'll proceed. And we'll wait for this to finish. Yes, we'll proceed. Okay, let's bring these up close and see what we've got. Wait for the camera to refocus here. Okay. So on the Atrix, the score is 2686. On the Droid X2, the score is 2517. So very close, but like I said, I would expect the Atrix to be a little bit faster due to the RAM bump. And that's pretty much it. But that's not bad at all. That's very good compared to these other devices. The Droid X, Nexus 1, HTC Evo, and all the way down to the Moto Droid, the original Droid. So pretty good results. And that kind of concludes the test between the two. But if there's anything specifically you wanted to know about the phones that I haven't covered in other comparisons or anything else, please feel free to ask. Comment below and I'll try and answer that the best I can. Again, thanks for watching. If you haven't subscribed already, please go ahead and do that. This is Aaron. I'll see you next time.